a rancher saved an Apache woman from drowning. And what happened that night no one expected. The sun had barely risen above the jagged hills when the rancher, John, stepped out of his small wooden house. The morning air was crisp and carried the faint smell of wild grass and fresh earth. He took a deep breath, feeling the calmness that came with the start of another day on the ranch. His life had always been tied to the land, to the rhythm of the animals and the quiet beauty of the surrounding hills. Each day brought work, feeding the livestock, checking fences, and ensuring the fields were in order. But it also brought a sense of peace that John could not imagine living without. As he walked toward the stables, the soft sound of the wind rustling through the trees was interrupted by the distant roar of the river. The river ran fast this time of year, swollen with melted snow from the mountains upstream. He had always respected its strength, knowing how easily it could sweep someone away if they were careless. His mind, however, was focused on the day ahead. There were horses to feed, cattle to check, and fences to repair before the sun climbed too high and the heat made the work unbearable. John whistled softly as he walked, greeting the animals as he passed. A few horses neighed in response, lifting their heads to look at him. The cattle were already moving slowly through the pasture, grazing on the green shoots that had survived the winter. Everything seemed normal, and the rhythm of his life was steady and comforting. But then a sudden sharp cry cut through the quiet morning. It was a sound filled with fear and desperation. John froze for a moment, straining his ears to listen. It had come from the direction of the river. Without thinking twice, he dropped the bucket he was carrying and ran toward the sound. His boots sank slightly in the wet earth as he sprinted over the uneven ground, but the cries grew louder, more frantic, sending a chill down his spine. Someone was in trouble, and he knew he had to act fast. When he reached the edge of the river, his heart almost stopped. There, struggling in the rushing water, was a young woman. Her dark hair clung to her face, and her arms flailed as she tried to stay above the surface. The current was strong, pulling her downstream with a force that made it clear she could not escape on her own. Panic flashed in her eyes, and she let out another terrified scream. John did not hesitate. He kicked off his boots, rolled up his sleeves, and plunged into the cold, churning water. The icy current shocked his body, but he fought against it, keeping his focus on her. The water pushed and pulled at him, testing his strength, but he moved with determination. Reaching her, he grasped her arm firmly and shouted over the roar of the river, "I've got you, Bess. Hold on." Her eyes widened with a mixture of fear and relief as she clung to him, trembling. It was not easy. The river fought them every step of the way. John held her tightly, feeling the power of the water as it tried to drag them both under. By step, he maneuvered them toward the shallower part of the river, using his strength and knowledge of the currents to keep them afloat. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, his boots touched the riverbed, and he pulled her onto the bank. Both of them were soaked and shivering, but they were safe. The young woman collapsed onto the grass, coughing and trying to catch her breath. John knelt beside her, offering his coat to cover her trembling shoulders. She looked up at him with wide, wary eyes, unsure if he was friend or stranger. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice calm and steady. She nodded slowly, too exhausted to speak at first, but her eyes never left his. He noticed her clothes were soaked through and muddy, and her hands were scraped from struggling against the rocks and branches along the riverbank. She was young, probably in her early 20s, and there was something in her eyes, a mixture of fear, pride, and suspicion, that told him she had faced difficulties before. She was not someone who gave trust easily, and he could see that now. Bright. John helped her to her feet and guided her toward his house, offering words of comfort as they walked.
"You're safe now," he said.
"Let's get you warm and dry." She followed him silently, her steps careful and cautious, like she was still weighing whether to trust him. When they reached the small wooden house, John lit a fire in the hearth, and the warmth began to chase away the cold that had settled deep into her bones. He brought her a blanket and handed her a cup of warm tea, which she accepted with shaking hands. The smell of the tea, mixed with the scent of the firewood burning in the hearth, seemed to calm her slightly. She sipped quietly, her eyes studying the room and the man who had saved her life. John gave her space, understanding that trust could not be forced. He knew that saving her from the river was only the beginning. Now he had to earn her trust, and that could take time. As she sat by the fire, slowly regaining warmth, John observed her more closely. There was strength in her posture, even as she shivered. Her eyes held intelligence and alertness, as if she were constantly evaluating the world around her. He could tell that she was not used to relying on anyone else for help. Yet despite her caution, there was a faint glimmer of gratitude in her gaze, a recognition that he had risked his own safety to save her. Outside, the river continued to rush past the ranch, a reminder of the danger they had narrowly escaped. The birds were beginning to stir, and the wind carried the fresh scent of morning across the land. It was a new day, and yet the events that had unfolded would mark a turning point, not just for the young woman, but for John as well. He had acted without hesitation, driven by instinct and compassion, and now he faced the challenge of bridging the gap between two very different lives.
As he stacked firewood and tended to chores, John kept an eye on her.
She was beginning to relax, slowly letting down the walls she had built around herself. He did not press her for answers, knowing that her story would come in its own time. Best. For now, he focused on the simple acts of care, offering food, warmth, and reassurance that spoke louder than words. The sun climbed higher, casting light on the rugged landscape of hills, fields, and riverbanks. It highlighted the contrasts between the calm of the ranch and the chaos of the river that morning. John knew that this day would be remembered, not just for the danger, but for the unexpected connection that had formed in the face of it. The young woman, once a stranger, was now a part of his day, and their fates had become intertwined in a way neither could have anticipated. By midday, she was sitting more comfortably by the fire, her shivering replaced by a cautious curiosity. John could see her beginning to notice the little details of the ranch, the way the animals moved, the smell of the earth, the quiet strength of the land itself. He spoke softly, telling her about the routines of the ranch and the lives of the animals he cared for. She listened, sometimes asking questions, sometimes simply watching. There was no rush. The events of the river had created a bond of trust, fragile but present. John knew that this bond would take time to grow, but he also knew that moments like these, the act of saving a life, the care given afterward, could change the course of two people forever. He felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, a knowledge that his actions had made a real difference. As evening approached, the young woman finally spoke, her voice soft and hesitant. "Thank you," she said, her words carrying more weight than any grand gesture could. John nodded, offering a simple smile. It was a beginning, the first step toward understanding, trust, and perhaps something more. The ranch, the river, and the quiet hills had witnessed a moment that neither of them would forget. And as night fell, the fire crackled warmly in the hearth, a small light in the vast, wild world outside. In that moment, John realized that sometimes life's most unexpected events, like saving a stranger from a river, could lead to moments of connection and courage that were far greater than the danger itself. The day had begun like any other with routine and work, but it ended with a quiet promise that lives, no matter how different, could intersect in ways that left a lasting mark on both. The young woman sat quietly by the fire, wrapped in the warm blanket John had given her. Her dark hair, still damp from the river, hung in loose strands over her face. She watched the flames flicker and dance, reflecting in her wide, cautious eyes. The rancher could see her tension, even as she tried to appear composed. He knew that after what had happened by the river, she had every reason to be wary. Trust was not something given easily, and he respected that. John moved around the small kitchen, preparing a simple meal of bread, beans, and roasted vegetables. The smell filled the room, and he hoped it would provide comfort after her frightening experience. She smelled it too, and her stomach rumbled slightly. She looked up at him, and for a brief moment her eyes softened with hunger and relief. John placed a plate in front of her, careful not to speak too much. Words were not always needed when action spoke louder. She picked up the food cautiously, her movements deliberate and careful. It was clear that she was not used to someone taking care of her, not in this way. She had survived on her own for a long time, relying on her wits and instincts. Now, she was faced with a man who had risked his own safety to save her, offering her warmth, food, and shelter without asking for anything in return. The idea was foreign to her, and she did not know how to respond. John sat across from her, eating slowly and keeping his eyes gentle and unintrusive. He wanted her to feel safe, to understand that he meant no harm. Best, he began to speak softly, telling her about the ranch and the work he did every day. The cattle need to be checked in the morning, he said, and the horses like to run in the fields when the sun is high. The land can be harsh, but it has its own kind of beauty. He spoke in simple words, careful to be patient and clear. She listened, tilting her head slightly, but did not answer. Her silence was not rudeness. It was caution. She had learned long ago that words could be dangerous, and sometimes it was safer to remain quiet until she understood who she was speaking to. John noticed this and nodded silently. He understood her hesitation. Trust was earned, and he was willing to wait. After a while, she set down her plate and looked around the room. The small home was modest but clean, with signs of a life lived in harmony with the land. Tools hung neatly on the walls, and the furniture was simple but sturdy. There were photographs of family, though they were faded with age, and small trinkets that suggested a life full of hard work and simple pleasures. Breaths. She studied them quietly, her curiosity slowly replacing some of her fear. "Do you live here alone?" she asked finally, her voice soft and careful. Bow! It was the first word she had spoken since the river. John nodded. Bah. Yes, my family is gone, and it's just me and the animals. The land keeps me busy, and I like it that way. It's quiet, but it's enough.
He looked at her gently, giving her the space to speak if she wished.
She nodded slowly, taking in his words. There was something honest in the way he spoke, a sincerity that was hard to ignore. She found herself wondering about the man who had saved her life. Why had he done it? What had driven him to jump into the cold, dangerous river without a second thought? She had seen courage before, but this was different. This was a quiet, steady courage, the kind that came from compassion rather than pride.
Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky.
She began to relax a little, moving closer to the fire and letting the warmth seep into her chilled bones. John continued his work around the house, tending to the animals and fixing a broken fence post near the doorway. Every now and then he glanced at her, making sure she was comfortable. Their connection was subtle, built on small gestures and shared silence rather than words. At one point she stood and walked to the window looking out at the river where she had nearly drowned. The water rushed past, sparkling in the sunlight, and she felt a mix of fear and awe. The river had been cruel, but it had also brought her here, to safety, and to a man she did not yet fully understand. She turned back to the room, and for a moment their eyes met. There was an unspoken understanding, a recognition of shared humanity that needed no words. As the day wore on, John suggested they take a walk outside to enjoy the fresh air and the open land. She hesitated at first, but eventually agreed, staying close to him as they stepped into the sunlight. The ranch stretched out before them, a patchwork of green pastures, rocky hills, and winding dirt paths. The animals moved about, grazing and exploring, their calm presence adding to the sense of peace that surrounded the place. Walking together, they began to talk more. She shared bits of her life, carefully chosen, while John listened without interruption. She told him of the herbs she had been gathering near the river, and how she had enjoyed learning about the plants and their uses. She spoke cautiously, aware that words could reveal more than she intended.
John responded with stories of his own, of life on the ranch, of the animals, and of the land that sustained him.
Bray. Despite the difference in their worlds, a quiet bond began to form. The young woman realized that John was not just a man of the land, but also a man of integrity, someone who acted from kindness and courage. She began to feel a sense of safety she had not known for a long time. The fear that had gripped her since the river slowly loosened, replaced by a cautious curiosity and a growing respect for the rancher who had saved her. As evening approached, John built a small fire outside. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, and the sound of the river blended with the chirping of crickets and the distant calls of birds returning to their nests. They sat together, not speaking much, but feeling the quiet comfort of shared company. The young woman began to notice small details, the way John moved with confidence, the gentle way he tended to the fire, the quiet patience in his gaze. Well, and the stars appeared in the clear sky above. The young woman, for the first time that day, felt a sense of calm. She realized that the rancher's kindness was genuine, that he had risked his life for hers without expecting anything in return. It was a feeling she had not experienced often, and it left her both surprised and grateful. Round. She wrapped herself in the blanket again, the warmth of the fire and the presence of John making her feel safe in a way she had not felt in years. John, too, felt a shift.
He had spent much of his life alone, content with the rhythm of the ranch and the quiet of the land.
But the events of the day had introduced something unexpected, an awareness of another life, a life full of resilience, intelligence, and courage. He realized that saving her had been more than an act of duty. It had opened the door to a connection he had never anticipated. As the fire burned low, they sat in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The young woman considered the river, the danger she had faced, and the man who had saved her. Bah. She wondered what her future held, and for the first time she allowed herself to feel a small sense of hope. John thought about the day, the unexpected twist of fate that had brought her to his ranch, and the strange, quiet bond that was beginning to form between them. The night was calm, with only the soft rustle of leaves and the distant roar of the river breaking the silence. In that quiet moment, both realized that the events of the day had changed them. She had been saved, yes, but more importantly, she had found someone she could trust, and he had discovered that life could offer unexpected surprises. Connections that went beyond routine and work, moments that reminded him why he loved the land and the people who crossed his path. By the time they went inside to rest, the bond had strengthened, subtle but unmistakable. The young woman slept fitfully, dreaming of the river and the man who had saved her, while John kept a quiet vigil, ensuring she was safe. Outside, the ranch rested under the starry sky, peaceful yet alive with the promise of a new day. The night had brought them together. The river had tested them, and the fire had offered warmth and comfort. For both, it was a day that would not be forgotten. The young woman, once a stranger, was now a guest in his home. And John, the rancher, realized that sometimes life's most unexpected encounters could lead to moments of trust, understanding, and the beginnings of a connection that neither could have foreseen. The next morning, the young woman awoke to the soft light of dawn streaming through the small windows of John's house. The warmth of the fire had faded, and the cool morning air seeped in, carrying the fresh scent of the earth and the nearby river. She sat up slowly, her movements careful as she stretched her stiff limbs. Her eyes wandered around the modest room, taking in the simple furniture, the neatly stacked firewood, and the tools that showed the life of a man who worked closely with the land. John was already up, moving quietly around the kitchen. The smell of freshly baked bread and boiling water for tea filled the room. He looked up when she appeared, smiling gently. "Good morning," he said. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded, not trusting her voice to be steady just yet. He understood. Sleep had not come easily for her the night before. Breakfast was simple but hearty, and as they ate, a comfortable silence settled between them. She observed John carefully, noticing the way he worked, the way he moved with a steady confidence, and the gentleness he displayed even in the smallest tasks. There was a calmness about him that she had never known in her life before. A quiet strength that did not demand attention, yet was impossible to ignore. After breakfast, John suggested they check on the animals. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she wanted to be involved, but curiosity won. She followed him outside, the morning sun warming her face. The ranch stretched out before them, a vast expanse of green pastures, rocky hills, and grazing cattle. Horses moved gracefully in the distance, and birds flitted from tree to tree, filling the air with their songs. The young woman felt a sense of wonder at the openness of the land, so different from the places she had known. John began his routine, feeding the animals and checking fences. She watched him for a while, then slowly began to imitate his actions, helping with small tasks. He guided her patiently, explaining each step and giving gentle encouragement. She found herself relaxing in his presence, feeling a sense of purpose and belonging that she had not felt in a long time. It was strange and yet comforting. As they worked, John spoke softly about life on the ranch, telling her stories of past seasons, challenges, and successes. She listened intently, occasionally asking questions about the animals or the land. Her curiosity was cautious, but genuine. Slowly, she began to share small pieces of her own life, carefully chosen and selective, revealing enough for him to understand without giving away too much. She told him about the herbs she had been gathering by the river, about the knowledge she had learned from her family and community, and about the careful ways she observed the world around her. John listened with interest, genuinely impressed by her skill and wisdom. It was clear that she had survived through intelligence, resilience, and a deep connection to her surroundings. The more he learned, the more he respected her. By mid-morning, a subtle bond had begun to form. They worked side by side, the rhythm of the ranch life guiding their actions. There was no need for forced conversation. The shared tasks created a sense of companionship. The young woman felt a cautious trust growing inside her, a recognition that John's kindness was real and consistent. And John, in turn, felt a quiet admiration for her courage, intelligence, and the dignity with which she carried herself. After several hours, John suggested a break. They sat together on a grassy hill overlooking the river. The water sparkled in the sunlight, moving swiftly over rocks and creating small whitecaps. She stared at it for a long moment, remembering the terror she had felt the day before. But now, with John beside her, she felt a small sense of safety and even a strange kind of awe.
The river was powerful, unpredictable, and beautiful all at once.
John spoke gently. "You were very brave yesterday. The river is not easy to fight against, and you kept yourself together." "I'm proud of you." She looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. Compliments were not something she had often received, and praise from someone she trusted carried weight. A small smile appeared on her lips, shy but real. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of nature, the river rushing, the wind through the trees, the distant calls of animals. The young woman began to feel something she had not expected, calm. She realized that, for the first time in a long while, she felt safe, not just physically, but emotionally. It was a strange and wonderful feeling, and she was unsure how to process it. As the afternoon approached, John suggested they gather firewood together. Walking through the fields and hills, they talked more about life, their routines, and their observations. There were moments of humor, small jokes, playful comments, and moments of quiet reflection. Each shared moment allowed them to understand each other better, bridging the gap between their very different worlds. While collecting firewood, they encountered a small herd of deer grazing near the edge of the field. The young woman's eyes lit up with interest. She had always felt a connection to animals, and watching them so close was a rare gift. John explained their behaviors, the patterns of the herd, and the ways to approach without startling them. She listened attentively, asking questions and showing a natural curiosity. It pleased him to see her engage so freely, a sign that trust was growing between them. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows over the land, they returned to the ranch with the gathered wood. The young woman felt a subtle change inside her, a growing respect for John, a recognition of his patience, kindness, and strength. She began to see him not just as a man who had saved her, but as someone who had earned her trust, slowly and consistently. And John, in turn, felt a deepening admiration for her resilience, intelligence, and courage. That evening, as they prepared a simple meal together, there was a sense of normalcy that had been absent before. She chopped vegetables while he tended to the fire, their movements coordinated without words. Small gestures, a smile, a nod, a shared glance, carried more meaning than conversation. The young woman felt warmth not only from the fire but from the connection that was forming between them. It was subtle, fragile, but undeniable. After dinner, John suggested they sit outside for a while, to enjoy the evening air. They watched as the sun dipped behind the hills, turning the sky shades of orange, pink, and purple. The young woman spoke for a moment about her past experiences, carefully chosen and measured, revealing small truths about her life and culture. John listened intently, showing genuine respect and interest. Each story, each word, allowed them to understand each other more deeply. Night fell, and stars dotted the sky like scattered diamonds. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, and the river flowed steadily in the distance. The young woman felt a sense of peace she had not known for a long time. She realized that trust and understanding were growing between her and John, that the bond formed in the dangerous moments by the river had begun to strengthen through shared experiences and mutual respect. John, too, felt a shift in his perspective. He had always lived a solitary life, content with the rhythm of the ranch and the steady work of the land. But now, he recognized that life could offer unexpected moments of connection, moments that brought warmth, understanding, and a sense of shared humanity. The young woman was no longer just a stranger. She was someone whose presence challenged him to see the world in new ways, to recognize courage, resilience, and the quiet strength that comes from surviving against the odds. As they sat quietly, the young woman finally spoke again, her voice soft but steady. "I've never met anyone like you," she said. "Someone who would help without asking, who was patient and kind. It's different from what I expected." John smiled gently. "Sometimes people surprise us," he said. "And sometimes we surprise ourselves." They watched the stars together, sharing a moment of silence filled with understanding. The night carried a quiet promise, a sense that their paths had crossed for a reason, that the river had not just tested her, but had brought her to a place where trust and connection were possible. Both understood that the events of the day had changed them in ways neither could fully predict. Before retiring for the night, John prepared her blanket and ensured the fire in the hearth was safe and warm. The young woman settled into the comfort of the room, feeling gratitude and a subtle sense of hope. For the first time in a long while, she believed that people could be trusted, that kindness could be genuine, and that connection could grow even in the most unexpected circumstances. John, sitting quietly nearby, reflected on the day. The young woman had faced fear and uncertainty, and yet she had shown strength, intelligence, and resilience. He admired her deeply, not only for surviving the river but for the way she carried herself with dignity and caution. Their shared experiences had created a quiet bond, one built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. As sleep finally claimed them both, the ranch settled into a peaceful quiet. Outside, the river flowed on, carrying memories of the day's events and whispers of the moments yet to come. The bond between the rancher and the young woman had begun to grow, subtle but strong, promising challenges and surprises in the days ahead. The night was calm yet alive with possibility, setting the stage for a connection that would continue to deepen with each passing day. The day had been long, filled with quiet work and small moments of connection, and now the ranch settled into the calm of evening. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows over the fields, and turning the sky a deep orange that slowly faded into purple. The river reflected the colors, shimmering as it moved steadily past the ranch. Inspiration. For the young woman it was a strange mixture of beauty and unease. The memory of nearly drowning still lingered in her mind. But beside her was John, the man who had saved her life, and his presence gave her a quiet sense of reassurance she had not known in a long time. As darkness grew, John built a fire outside near the edge of the fields. The flames crackled and danced, sending small sparks into the cool evening air. The young woman sat beside him, wrapped in a blanket, watching the fire and listening to the sounds of the ranch. The animals had settled for the night, their movements quiet except for the occasional rustle in the brush or the distant call of a night bird. All seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful. Suddenly, a sound from the nearby hills broke the calm, a faint snapping of twigs, followed by a rustle in the bushes. Bay. The young woman stiffened, her body tense as fear and alertness surged. She looked at John, who had also noticed the sound. His expression remained calm, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the darkness. He gestured for her to stay quiet, and she obeyed. Her heart beating fast, John reached for a long, sturdy stick he used as a walking staff, and quietly moved toward the sound. The young woman followed cautiously, staying close behind him. The rustling grew louder, and the night seemed to hold its breath as they approached the edge of the field. Suddenly, a small animal, a fox, likely, darted across their path, and they both exhaled softly in relief. But the tension eased, but the memory of that fear lingered, reminding them how quickly safety could be disrupted in the wild.
They returned to the fire, but the young woman could not shake the feeling that something more significant might be approaching.
The ranch had always been safe, but this was different. She had learned to trust her instincts in the wilderness, and her instincts were warning her that the night might hold unexpected events. John noticed her unease and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "The ranch is safe," he said gently. "But we should always be ready, just in case." She nodded, feeling both comforted and alert. As they sat together, a sudden noise came from the far side of the field, a louder, heavier rustle that suggested something larger than a fox. Both froze, listening intently. The sound came again, closer this time, and they realized that it could be an animal, or perhaps someone wandering too near the ranch. Breath.
The young woman instinctively reached for John's arm, feeling a surge of courage mixed with fear. This was the moment when her instincts and his experience would need to work together.
John motioned for her to stay low as he slowly moved toward the noise, using the shadows for cover. The young woman followed, keeping her breathing quiet and her movements careful. As they neared the edge of the field, the source of the sound became clear. A pair of coyotes had wandered close to the animals, attracted by the smell of food and livestock. They circled, growling softly, eyes glinting in the firelight. Breaths. The young woman's heart raced. She had encountered wild animals before, but never so close to someone she was beginning to trust. John acted quickly, using his staff to create a barrier and shouting to scare the animals away. The coyotes hesitated, growling but unsure, then slowly retreated into the darkness, disappearing among the trees and hills. The young woman exhaled a long breath she had been holding, her pulse still quick. She realized something important. Her presence here did not just depend on John's protection, it also depended on her own courage and quick thinking. She had faced danger before, and now, side by side with John, she felt her skills could matter in a real, immediate way. After the coyotes had gone, John guided her back to the fire. They sat quietly, letting their nerves settle. The young woman's hands were still trembling slightly, but she felt a strange sense of pride. She had stayed calm under pressure and had helped to observe the situation, even if John had done most of the work. For the first time, she felt more like an equal in facing danger, rather than just someone being protected. The night deepened, and the sky became a canvas of stars. The river murmured quietly in the distance, a steady reminder of the power of nature and the unpredictability of life. The young woman watched the flames flicker and thought about the day, the work, the trust building, and now the night's danger. She realized that every moment of this experience had been a lesson in trust, courage, and connection. As they sat together, John began to speak softly about his own experiences with danger on the ranch. He told her stories of storms that had flooded the fields, wild animals that had threatened the livestock, and moments when he had had to act quickly to save lives. His words were calm, measured, and honest, showing her that bravery was not just a reaction to fear. It was a careful, considered action in the face of uncertainty. She listened, absorbing every word, and felt a growing respect for him, not only as a protector but as a man who lived courageously every day. Then came another sound, this one closer and heavier. Both froze again. The young woman's instincts flared. This time, it did not feel like an animal. John tensed but remained calm, whispering for her to stay behind him. As they crept toward the source, they saw movement near the edge of the field, a figure cloaked in darkness, moving quickly. The young woman's breath caught. This was not like anything she had faced before. Suddenly, the figure stumbled near a rock, revealing itself in the firelight. It was a man, lost and confused, likely having wandered too far from the nearby town. He seemed harmless but frightened, and his presence explained the earlier noises. John approached slowly, keeping his staff ready but relaxed. The young woman watched, recognizing the signs of fear and relief in the stranger's eyes.
He raised his hands, showing he meant no harm, and John guided him gently toward the ranch.
Once inside, they learned that the man had been lost for hours and had feared the wilderness. He was grateful for their help, and the young woman noticed how naturally John treated him with kindness and patience. It was a quiet lesson for her. Bravery was not only in facing danger, but also in extending trust and compassion to others. She felt inspired, realizing that courage and kindness could exist together in powerful ways. After the man settled in for the night, the young woman and John returned outside to the quiet fields. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the stars shone brightly above. She sat beside John, feeling the weight of the night's events and the strange mix of fear, relief, and admiration. For the first time, she felt truly connected to someone outside her own world, and it was both comforting and unsettling. John noticed her thoughtful expression and spoke softly.
You were very brave tonight.
But you stayed calm, observed everything, and acted when needed. That's not easy, and I'm proud of you.
Psh, psh. She looked at him, a small smile forming. For the first time, she felt that her presence here mattered not just for her safety, but because she had contributed, because her courage had made a difference. But the night ended with them sitting quietly by the fire, letting the calm of the stars and the whisper of the river settle around them. The young woman wrapped herself in the blanket, her mind replaying the events. The river, the coyotes, the lost man, and the way John had faced each challenge with steady hands and a calm heart. She realized that life on the ranch was unpredictable, but with courage, observation, and trust, challenges could be met and even overcome. As sleep finally approached, they returned inside. The young woman lay down, exhausted from the adrenaline of the night, but filled with a new sense of confidence and respect for John, for herself, and for the world around her. John ensured that the fire was safe and warm, checking the animals one last time before settling in himself. Outside, the ranch rested quietly under the starry sky, a place that had been tested and had remained strong. The events of the night had changed them both. The young woman had discovered her own bravery in the face of danger, and John had recognized the courage and intelligence she carried within her. A quiet bond had deepened between them, strengthened by shared challenges, mutual respect, and the understanding that trust and connection were built not only in safety, but in moments of uncertainty. The night at the ranch ended with a feeling of quiet triumph. Both had faced unexpected challenges, both had learned to trust in themselves and each other, and both had come away with a sense of connection that could not be undone. The river, the hills, the fire, and the stars had all witnessed a moment of courage and understanding, a moment that would remain in their memories forever. And as they drifted to sleep, the young woman thought for the first time that life could be more than survival. It could be trust, companionship, and even hope. And John, the rancher who had always lived a solitary life, realized that sometimes the greatest moments of courage and connection came when least expected. Morning arrived quietly over the ranch, painting the hills in soft gold and warming the fields with the gentle light of the sun. The river shimmered in the distance, flowing steadily as if nothing had happened the night before. But for John and the young woman, everything had changed. The events of the previous day and night had left an imprint on their minds, hearts, and their relationship. They had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty together, and in doing so they had built a bond that neither could deny. The young woman woke first, the morning sun spilling across the wooden floor of the small room. She stretched carefully, still feeling the tension of the previous night's adventures in her muscles. The fire had burned low, leaving just the warmth of the embers, and a quiet peace filled the house. She thought about John, the man who had saved her from the river, guided her through danger, and treated her with patience and respect. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of belonging, a feeling that perhaps she could trust someone outside of her own world. She moved quietly through the room, careful not to disturb John, who was still asleep. For a moment, she paused by the window, watching the animals grazing in the early light, the hills rolling gently into the distance. Everything seemed calm, peaceful, and yet full of life. The ranch was a place of work, danger, and beauty, a place where life could be harsh but also full of lessons and unexpected connections.
She took a deep breath, feeling both gratitude and hope rising in her chest.
John awoke soon after, and they exchanged a quiet greeting. The comfort of the morning was different from the warmth of the previous night. There were no sudden noises, no immediate threats, only the steady rhythm of life on the ranch. Breakfast was simple, and as they ate, they spoke more freely than they had in the past days. The young woman began to share small stories about her life, not out of necessity, but out of a desire to connect, to bridge the gap between her world and John's. After breakfast, John suggested they check the fields and the animals together. Walking side by side, they observed the cattle grazing, the horses moving gracefully, and the smaller animals scurrying across the pasture. The young woman began to notice details she had never seen before: the subtle way the wind bent the grass, the pattern of the river's flow, and the behavior of the animals as they moved in response to the land. Best. John guided her gently, explaining the importance of observation, patience, and understanding in caring for the land. As they worked, they spoke about hopes and possibilities. John asked her if she had a place to return to, a home or community she was connected to. She hesitated at first, her mind wandering to memories of her past life, the people she had known, and the challenges she had faced. But the presence of John, steady and kind, gave her the courage to speak. She shared what she could, not every detail but enough to show that she had roots, a sense of identity, and a life beyond the ranch.
John listened without judgment, nodding thoughtfully.
Narration. "You have strength," he said. "Not just the kind you need to survive, but the kind that makes you careful, thoughtful, and wise. That's something rare, and I respect it." She looked at him, surprise flickering in her eyes. Then a small smile formed. For the first time, she felt that someone truly saw her for who she was, not just as a stranger or someone to protect. It was a small but powerful moment, one that strengthened the bond forming between them. By midday, they returned to the house to rest and eat. The young woman began to feel more at ease, helping with chores and sharing small moments of humor and curiosity. She discovered that the animals were not only part of John's work but also his companions, and she felt a quiet connection to them as well. The ranch became a place of learning, reflection, and quiet discovery for her, a place where she could grow and feel both safe and challenged. As afternoon turned to evening, John suggested a walk to the river. The young woman agreed, feeling both curiosity and courage. They followed a familiar path, walking slowly, enjoying the natural beauty surrounding them. The river glistened in the sunlight, and she could see the patterns of the current, the rocks beneath the surface, and the plants growing along the banks. For her, the river was no longer only a symbol of danger, but also a reminder of resilience, trust, and the power of connection.
Reaching the riverbank, they sat on a large rock, watching the water flow.
The young woman spoke of the river, of her memories and fears, of how close she had come to losing everything. John listened quietly, offering gentle words of comfort. "You survived," he said. "You faced danger, and you learned from it. That's courage, and it's part of who you are." She smiled softly, feeling a sense of pride she had not allowed herself to feel before. The sun began to dip below the hills, casting golden light across the river. They stayed in silence for a while, each lost in thought. The young woman realized that she had grown in more ways than she could count in just a few days. Courage, trust, understanding, and a sense of connection. And John realized that he had discovered something new too: the value of patience, trust, and the quiet power of kindness in forging bonds that could withstand fear and uncertainty. That evening, back at the ranch, John offered the young woman a choice. She could stay as long as she wished, enjoying the safety and routine of the ranch, or she could return to her own life with his guidance and protection if needed. She considered the offer carefully. For the first time, she felt a sense of hope about the future, a feeling that she could face challenges without being alone. With a small smile, she nodded, choosing to stay, not because she needed protection, but because she had found a place of understanding and trust. The night settled over the ranch, quiet and calm. The stars shone brightly above, the river whispered softly in the distance, and the animals slept peacefully in the fields. The young woman sat by the fire once more, wrapped in a blanket, feeling a sense of peace and belonging. She thought of the river, of John, and of the journey that had brought her here. It had been filled with fear, courage, trust, and discovery. And she knew that the bond she shared with John would remain strong, built on mutual respect and understanding. John watched her quietly, feeling a sense of satisfaction and reflection. The days had been challenging, filled with unexpected events, but they had also been moments of growth, connection, and realization. He recognized the courage and strength she carried within her, and he felt grateful that their paths had crossed. Their lives, once separate and distant, had intertwined in a way that brought hope, understanding, and a shared sense of purpose. As the night deepened, they both felt the weight of what had passed and the promise of what was to come. The young woman knew that she could trust John, and he knew that she had courage and wisdom beyond what he had first realized. Together they had faced fear and uncertainty, and together they had grown stronger. The river, the hills, the fire, and the ranch itself had witnessed moments of bravery, trust, and quiet triumph. It had been a journey of discovery for both of them, revealing the strength that comes from connection, the courage that comes from facing danger, and the peace that comes from understanding and trust. By the time they retired for the night, a gentle calm had settled over the ranch. The young woman lay down, feeling warmth, safety, and the quiet happiness that comes from knowing one has found a place to belong. John ensured the fire was safe and warm, reflecting on the events that had shaped the last few days. Both knew that life on the ranch would continue to hold challenges, but they also knew that together they could face whatever came next. The night passed quietly, the stars twinkling above, the river flowing steadily, and the ranch resting peacefully. The young woman slept soundly, comforted by the safety and trust she had found. John, too, slept with a sense of fulfillment, knowing that the events of the past days had strengthened both their courage and their bond. Morning would come again, bringing work, challenges, and new experiences, but the connection they had built would endure. The river had tested them, the night had challenged them, and the land had offered both beauty and lessons. Through it all, they had discovered the value of trust, patience, courage, and understanding. And as the sun rose over the hills once more, they knew that life could be unpredictable and sometimes dangerous, but it could also offer moments of hope, trust, and unexpected connection. The young woman and John had found something rare, a bond formed through shared experience, mutual respect, and the quiet courage of facing life together.
Their journey had begun with danger, uncertainty, and fear, but it ended with understanding, trust, and a sense of possibility.
The ranch, the river, and the hills would continue to stand as witnesses to the story of two lives intertwined, a story of courage, kindness, and the unexpected ways that trust and connection can change everything. In that quiet, peaceful moment, both John and the young woman understood that the river had not only tested them, it had brought them together, showing them that the world could be both challenging and beautiful, both dangerous and full of hope. And with that understanding, a new chapter of their lives began, filled with possibility, companionship, and the quiet strength of shared courage.